Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast by Bangalore International Centre.
So you may have heard the phrase, periods don't stop for pandemics. This is not only catchy, it's also very true. Sadly, the pandemic has exacerbated a lot of the persisting challenges related to menstruation.
Menstrual Hygiene Day, first celebrated in 2014, is a global advocacy platform that brings together the voices and actions of non-profits, government agencies, individuals, the private sector, and the media to promote good menstrual health and hygiene for all women and girls. This day aims to break the silence, raise awareness, and change negative social norms around menstrual health and hygiene. This episode of BIC Talks marks the 28th of May, Menstrual Hygiene Day, with a conversation between two experts in this space, Dr. Mariana Lopez and Ira Guha. And now, over to Ira.
We're well into the 21st century, and yet 50% of women and girls in developing countries, including India, cannot afford basic sanitary products to manage their periods. This, together with limited knowledge and limited sanitary facilities, leads to serious health risks, such as reproductive and urinary tract infections. It also prevents women and girls from participating in essential daily activities, such as going to school and work. It's estimated that every year, 23 million girls in India drop out of school upon reaching puberty. I'm here today for the occasion of World Menstrual Hygiene Day to discuss how we can solve the challenge of period poverty to unlock gender equality, environmental sustainability, and growth. My name is Ira Guha. I'm the founder of Asan, which is a social enterprise with a mission to eradicate period poverty. Asan has designed an innovative menstrual cup, which is a reusable menstrual product. And for every one we sell, we donate one for free to a woman or girl who cannot afford period products. I'm joined in conversation by Dr. Mariana Lopez, who is an advocacy manager for the Global Association of Mobile Operators in the UK, where she works on women's digital and financial inclusion. Mariana also holds a PhD in development policy from the University of Manchester, where she analysed the connection between commercial activities, gender norms, and the environment, with a focus on the disposal of menstrual products in India. Welcome, Mariana. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, it's a pleasure to be here.
So, Mariana, every year we celebrate Menstrual Hygiene Day, which is a global event focused on bringing attention and awareness to the crisis in menstrual hygiene. But this year is a little bit different because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The menstrual hygiene crisis that was already bad has been made even worse. Can you talk a bit about how the pandemic has impacted access to period products and resources?
Of course. So you may have heard the phrase, periods don't stop for pandemics. This is not only catchy, it's also very true. Sadly, the pandemic has exacerbated a lot of the persisting challenges related to menstruation. The first is the lack of access to water, sanitation, and hygiene infrastructure. Millions of girls and women around the world still lack access to clean water and to facilities, even in their own houses. And they may not even have a private space to change and to dispose of their menstrual products. Especially during lockdown, this can be even more tricky because you have family members around at home all the time. So having a private toilet with clean running water that you can access at any time of the day is actually a privilege that not many enjoy. The second aspect is the disrupted access to products. In many countries like India, sanitary pads were not listed as one of the essential commodities. This meant that the supply chain was disrupted. So as soon as we had lockdown measures in place, a lot of plants that make these products had to close. And they also suspended their distribution of these products. In addition, a lot of government centers and schools also had to close, which meant that the free supply of products that they usually give to women were no longer available. In many instances, a lot of families also suffered financial stress from the pandemic caused by job losses and other impacts. And this meant that a lot of women became unable to afford the product that they usually were able to purchase. And last but not least is the limited access to education. As I said, schools, community centers, and other sources where girls and women typically get access to information were no longer available. This meant that a lot of women who don't have access to the internet or really to any other source of reliable information were left with no alternative or with no source to really understand what was going on with their bodies, but also what are the best practices to deal with your menstruation in a pandemic context. And while there is a silver lining in the sense that the new interventions around COVID-19 provide the opportunity to really integrate menstruation as a priority into different interventions and policies, what this pandemic has highlighted is the urgency to truly address these challenges and to not let them go on as we have for so long.
So I think what's really important in what you brought up in your answer is that period poverty and poor menstrual hygiene is not just about period products. We often think of the main solution as providing period products, and the pandemic has made it harder to do that. But you've also talked a lot about education and awareness and access to, clean public toilets and infrastructure, which has really been impacted by the pandemic. And as you say, if the main source of information for girls about puberty and about what they're going through during those years is school, and they're no longer going to school and they don't have access to the internet, then they're no longer receiving that education. And that's a really important point. So what are the implications of poor menstrual health? Why is it so important? And how does menstrual health actually relate back to economic opportunities for girls and women?
The point you made is exactly right. It would be wrong to minimize the challenge of period poverty by only limiting it to access to products. The reality is that there are many other components that you need to truly have menstrual health to achieve that state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being in relation to your menstrual cycle. And yes, access to facilities, to materials is an important part of it. But there is also the positive and respectful environment where you are free from stigma and stress, where you become confident to make informed decisions about your body. That is ultimately one of the most important outcomes that we need to achieve for women to feel free to participate in all spheres of life, either economic, social, religious, political, to be free from discrimination, from violence, from exclusion. Menstruation is a normal biological process. It's a sign of health, and no one should be punished or made feel ashamed because of it. And the reality is that, yes, and this has a lot of implications for women themselves, for their well-being, for their health, for their potential to participate in the economy, but it ultimately translates into broader benefits for their families, for their communities, for their national economies. So there is a growing body of evidence in terms of research that shows that actually a negative experience around menstruation contributes to absenteeism from school and from the workplace. Like you mentioned at the beginning, there are statistics that show that a significant number of girls actually drop out of school because of lack of proper menstrual hygiene management facilities. The World Bank even estimates that for 1% increase in the proportion of women who stay in secondary education, a country's annual per capita income grows by 0.3%. So there is clearly an incentive for girls to stay in school. And while we can say for certain that menstruation is the main cause for them to drop out, we can say there is enough research out there that shows that it does affect women's ability to continue to attend school, and therefore their potential ability to then become an active member of the workforce. And on the other hand, we also have losses in productivity when women miss days of work because of their periods. Again, another World Bank study in Southeast Asia found that if women employees were absent for 1 day a month due to a lack of facilities because of their periods, this would lead to 30 million workday absences in the Philippines and 2 million in Vietnam. And this translates into specific economic losses of $13 and $1.3 million respectively a year. So if this is not compelling enough to make the case for menstruation, I'm not sure what will be. And we can also think about the women who can't afford to miss a day of work. What happens to those women, for example, garment workers or women who work in agriculture, who don't have the choice to not come to work? You might have heard that in Maharashtra, there are villages where about half of the women have had hysterectomies. And that is that they have undergone surgery to have their uteruses be removed. And in the majority of the cases, they have done so because they want to work as sugarcane harvesters. They want to work in agriculture. And because the contractors won't hire them if they think that there's a risk that they might miss days of work because of the periods, then they don't get the job. So this is another very important aspect of the discussion. So we are seeing this great number of women, especially those living in poverty, who are forced to make choices that have long-term and irreversible impacts on their health and their lives. So we do need more research. We need to better understand all the different challenges that women face to manage menstruation in different contexts, but also throughout their lives. And yet, we can't say with confidence that this is not a woman's issue. This has very important and broad implications for socioeconomic development. And if we fail to live up to the task to address all the different considerations around menstruation, we're never going to build an inclusive and egalitarian society.
I think everything that you've shared from the studies that you've looked at very much reflects what we see in the field in rural India when we work on menstrual hygiene awareness and distributing menstrual products. What we find is, the studies you cited from the World Bank look at what if women have to miss one day of work because of their period, but I think in reality it can be 3 or 4 days of work. And that might be because the solutions they're using, such as rags, are so uncomfortable that they can barely walk. It could be that there's so much time and energy that has to be spent into cleaning the rags, washing them. And it could be that even if they're using pads, they have to spend so much time figuring out how to dispose of them. They usually burn them in the middle of the night. So it's not just, the physical aspect of managing your period. It's all of this anxiety around it as well, which prevents you from participating in any daily activity, such as work for those 3 or 4 days a month, which clearly has a huge economic impact.
I mean, when you think about it in terms of your own experience, all the time and energy that you spend managing your period, and hopefully you're in a situation where you have limited access to any products you might want to use, but in a situation where you don't, and when this truly becomes an oppressive element in your life that controls and prevents you from engaging on all the things you need to do, it really becomes a serious issue. And I'm sure you have great examples from your own experience working with women and about the significant changes that increased access to a safe and reliable product can actually have in your life.
Exactly. And there's 2 elements. There's time and cost savings, definitely. So you spend less time having to dispose of menstrual products, wash the cloth that you're using. You're spending less money on them if you have access to, safe menstrual hygiene. And then the other aspect is you save so much in terms of just worrying and anxiety each month about who in the community knows you're on your period and not being able to, enter a temple or being able to cook because of that. So I think there's 2 aspects to it. There's the time saving, and there's also just the well-being that comes from having a safe menstrual solution that means that you're not constantly worrying about the taboo of being on your period. So moving the conversation on to solutions, the primary solution, at least that we have here in India, which is promoted by the government and which is also promoted by, private companies and NGOs, is the use of disposable plastic sanitary pads. Many of us are familiar with the Padman movie, which was a famous Bollywood movie from a few years ago, which was about a sanitary pad machine that can be used in villages to make low-cost sanitary pads. However, the flip side of this is that there has been an enormous increase in the non-biodegradable plastic waste generated from pads. This is something you yourself studied in your PhD research. And one of the really shocking statistics that came out of your research was that in India alone, menstrual waste amounts to over 100,000 tons per year. Can you tell us a bit more about the environmental impact of sanitary waste?
Of course. So when I first started looking into this issue, I was honestly positively surprised when I saw so many initiatives and programs that were trying to help women and girls access sanitary pads. And my question was, well, what happens to this waste? So once you give it to girls, once they access it, once they use it, then what? Where does this waste go? Especially in developing countries like India that lack proper waste management systems. As you know, the world's already struggling to manage efficiently all kinds of waste. So what about menstrual waste? What happens to all these products? And sadly, again, it's very difficult to have a reliable estimate on the exact quantity of menstrual waste. We don't know how many women around the world are menstruating. We can estimate, but we don't know for sure. We can only also estimate how many of these women have access to products and also how many they use. So there are many variables that we don't really have data for. And by not having access to these numbers, we don't really understand the extent of the problem. So for my research, I drew on market data and population growth estimates and just try to come up with some numbers. And like you very well said, so today we are getting to a point where we have 100,000 tons of waste. But if market estimates are true and if projections continue as we expect them to, if sales continue to grow, and we get to a saturation point of 100 billion units, we could see this waste become up to 800,000 tons per year. That is not only a lot of waste. The question is, where is this waste going to be placed? Where does it end up? Is it going to be in lakes, oceans, rivers, open fields, streets, slums? Where are we going to put all this waste? And what's the worst is that this is not the end of it. The reality is that these estimates are only for disposable pads, disposable products. But when I did my research, I found that women follow a wide range of other practices to dispose of these products, such as burning them, washing them. You mentioned it yourself. And they also wrap them in plastic bags before throwing them away. The stigma around menstruation is such that women undergo and spend a lot of time, energy, and resources trying to make sure that these products are not exposed. They are so ashamed of it, and they are so worried that they might end up in the wrong place that they actually, again, spend a lot of resources, and this adds up to the environmental cost. If sales in India reach 30 billion menstrual products by 2030, that is in less than 10 years, and if all these products are washed and then wrapped in plastic bags, this would result in 1,800 million tons of plastic and wastewater per year. And these environmental impacts are additional to the waste we're already seeing. So on top of the waste, the discarded products, we have this additional water and plastic that's being used. And the reason why this waste, this water and plastic are being used is because of the taboos. So again, it all comes down to the stigma around menstruation that informs the practice that we follow, that informs the way women perceive their bodies, their menstruation, and ultimately engage with this waste. So, ultimately, we can't separate the environmental costs from the social issue.
So some of the statistics you have mentioned are truly astounding. You know, in my head, I'm just picturing these football fields full of kind of menstrual waste, and we clearly don't have the space for them. And it also, you know, the statistics about water waste are completely astounding. But even when you bring it back to the individual and just think of it as one person, you know, having to, because of the taboos, you know, collect the pads somewhere privately under your bed, then washing them, which is clearly, you know, not good for you, I'm sure. And then, you know, either burning them in the middle of the night or, you know, finding some kind of secret way to dispose of them. All of that really adds up. And I think both on the individual level and on the societal level, this waste management challenge just seems insurmountable. And another really interesting aspect of your research, which we haven't touched on yet, is the human element of menstrual waste. Because, you know, it's very easy to think, I'm throwing the sanitary pad away and fine, it's going to a landfill. But in fact, your research showed that no, sanitary pads actually have to be picked apart by waste pickers. Very often these waste pickers tend to be women. So there is a very, and it's a huge risk to the waste picker's health. So there is a human element to menstrual waste, which I would love you to touch on and tell us about.
Yes, exactly. So in many countries, India being one of them, the collection and segregation of menstrual waste is done manually. So it's very common for individuals who do this type of work to come across solid products when they collect household waste from public toilets, from landfills, but more and more often from just streets and open areas. So we're picturing these individuals who are going, you know, house by house, collecting these waste and then sitting and trying to sort it out, trying to find the valuables in the waste. And they are just literally placing their uncovered hands, no gloves, no protection, putting it in this pile of garbage and then, you know, coming out with a used pad. And that exposes them to diseases. It's also a very stressful situation. Again, the taboos around menstruation are not only applying for those who menstruate, it applies to anybody who comes across it. And to be honest, it can be quite a distressful situation. Again, if you put yourself in their position, having to depend on waste for your livelihood, and then having to, on top of that, experience this very unsanitary exposure to materials, it just adds on to the challenge. And the reality is that a lot of individuals who do this type of waste, who do this type of work, from low caste or from very challenging backgrounds, they don't have any other alternative or possible opportunities for income or finding a job. It is important to note that a lot of the negative perceptions around this work and around case actually make it more difficult for them to go about and segregate this waste. what I found in my research is that due to social norms, waste pickers can unable to request that consumers segregate menstrual waste. And they depend again on this waste for their livelihood. They're so scared that they are going to lose the fee that they get for collecting the waste from a given household that they just, take whatever they get. They don't refuse to collect it. And also consumers become less responsive to their demands. They don't consider their opinions valid. They don't consider their lives to be as important as theirs. And this just creates this vicious circle where the waste is just piling up, and these individuals are the ones who are ultimately paying the cost. So when we think about we are going to help women by helping them access all these products, then yes, that is one side of the equation. But what about the other human aspect of the problem? What about the individuals who are going to end up managing all this waste? Who's going to help them? What are the initiatives that we're putting in place to ensure that they are able to conduct this type of work in a dignified way, and also in a way that's actually contributing to improve the environmental impact? These individuals are in a key position to help the segregation of this waste and its proper destruction. But if they're also being guided by taboos and beliefs around the stigma of menstruation, they're not going to do it. What I observed in my research is that a lot of the waste speakers believe that menstrual blood is a source of harm. So when they get menstrual waste, instead of segregating it, they just throw it further down, in open areas like construction sites, or they burn it, or they just completely ignore it. And that means that this waste is less likely to be destroyed. So the issue is quite complex. It's about ensuring that these individuals are able to perform their functions again in a dignified way, but also that they contribute to helping manage the already growing environmental impact. And again, it boils down to taboos and the need to inform and change the ways that we engage with menstrual products, but also menstrual waste.
It's really quite incredible because plastic sanitary pad is something that is used for just a couple of hours, maybe 4 to 6 hours to collect your menstrual flow. And then you think it disappears, but really the life cycle of the sanitary pad is so much more complex because it's thrown away. It needs to be picked apart by someone. As you said, there are so many complexities around that. And then it might be thrown further downstream somewhere else. And then, we're just talking about one, but they pile up and up and up and then until you have billions. So Mariana, how can we shift the conversation and the focus from disposable menstrual products to reusable menstrual products that are better for the environment?
Well, I think this is exactly where you come in, and this is exactly why we need better alternatives. And the great news is that they already exist. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to come up with something, extraordinary or from outer space. We have good solutions. We just need to make sure that these are available to all women and that they have the opportunity to make an informed decision. And a lot of the women that I spoke to in my research care about their surroundings. They care about their environments. They know that these are the spaces where they live and work, where they're raising their families. They don't want to live, in waste or see again all the pollution around them. They simply don't know how to act. They don't know that they have the agency to make this change. And in many instances, they don't have the options, even when they do want to make a switch for better alternatives. So I think you told me, how can we make this change happen?
I think you're absolutely spot on when you say that the most important thing is access to information and education. So Asan, that's my social enterprise, we distribute menstrual cups, which are a reusable product made from silicone. So you boil them each month to sterilize them, and then you can use them from month to month, and they last years. But there are also other reusable products like cloth pads that can be washed. I think the main thing is that people just don't know that these products exist and that they aren't given the choice. And there's a lot of misinformation when it comes to reusable products. For example, because of the taboos, we think it's a bad thing to reuse a product that you once used for your period because we don't know how to properly sterilize it. We think it's not hygienic. And I think, it is definitely the way that we look at it is no period product should be forced on anyone, but every single woman or girl, no matter their income background, should have the information about the various period products out there. They should know how it impacts their health. They should know if it's disposable, how to properly dispose of it, or if it can be reused, how to wash it. And invariably, what you see is when you give people adequate information and adequate choice, they do make the decision that is best for their health. For example, if you do speak to somebody who doesn't have a lot of information and explain to them, that a disposable product, they need to spend on it every single month, which will cost a lot over the course of their lifetime, whereas a reusable product is a more affordable option and is also better for the environment and better for their health. I mean, 9 times out of 10, I think they will choose the reusable option. It's just about giving access to information and also, trusting that everybody has agency and will make the best decision for themselves when they have the right information.
I completely agree. I think that is the way forward, to give every individual the opportunity to make an informed choice and to find what works for them. Not every product, not every alternative adapts to you, to your needs, to your wants, to your beliefs. And there are many important considerations. Everybody deserves the opportunity, the right to make a choice, and the opportunity to access good products, and the whole narrative about like poor solutions for poor people, or that we should just distribute these bad quality pads for the sake of getting them to everybody, or just to tick a box because menstrual hygiene is now important. It's completely flawed. And so these women they deserve good choices. They are smart, they are capable, and they should have the possibility to access a product that will help them manage a normal biological process that will happen every month. It just continues to shock me that we haven't mainstream insufficient and decent alternatives for everybody. And that's going to happen, every month. Again, sorry, I can't even speak because I'm so shocked.
No, absolutely. And I think, just as we've talked about there being so many taboos and so much misinformation about periods, particularly in rural areas, I think there's an equal amount of misinformation, maybe in cities or, maybe even in developed countries, about the way in which people in rural areas make decisions. So it's very easy for us to say, well, sanitary pads are the easiest. Let's just, send all of these disposable sanitary pads to people. When in fact, as we've discussed, that's great. That's one option. But if women and girls are, given information and are told what the various options are, they will make the best decision for their health always.
Exactly. Don't underestimate the brilliance and the need of people. Don't just assume that because they are from a rural background or they have other challenges that they will not make the appropriate choice. I think that is the wrong way to start, to make assumptions for people and to say, well, they will never use a menstrual cup because they don't have the education, they will never insert something up their vagina. Well, that's completely wrong. If you give them enough information, if you explain the benefits, there is no reason to believe why they wouldn't at least try it. And then if it works for them, and they will continue to use it. And again, what we need to not do is to make wrong assumptions and to then launch massive initiatives or intervention based on those flawed assumptions. We need better alternatives, and we have them. We just need to be more creative about them.
So we've talked about so many challenges and so much complexity relating to menstrual health and hygiene. And despite the fact that we're already well into the 21st century, it just seems as if there's such a long way to go before everybody is able to have a safe and healthy period every single month. So, Mariana, do you have any closing thoughts on what each of us can do to overcome these challenges relating to menstrual hygiene? In particular, because overcoming these challenges have such enormous implications for achieving gender equality, achieving environmental sustainability, and also economic growth.
Of course. So I'll do two things. First, I'll just briefly give you some general recommendations that I came up as part of my research. And then I'll just give some examples of more personal actions that our audience can take, and which I think can have a significant impact on their lives, but also on those that surround them. So on a general level, what do we need? We need more research. We need to understand this topic better. We need to understand how do women use these products, how do they dispose of them, what are the contexts where they live and work, what are their needs and their wants. And we need to use this information, this evidence to inform policies, to mobilize relevant stakeholders, and to support business solutions. It comes down to investing in development, in testing, in scaling innovative and sustainable solutions that truly consider the product lifecycle and all the different ways that these products are disposed of. It comes down to a holistic perspective on the way that we approach menstrual hygiene. and in prioritizing alternatives that are good for the environment as well as good for individuals. We need to prioritize this possibility as much as accessibility. And we need to consider how effective sanitation systems and waste management systems really are. But then at a more personal level, I would invite you to think about your own experience when it comes to menstruation, or to think about the experience of somebody close to you. Have an open conversation about your period, and perhaps with somebody who has less access to information, or even with, a male relative, with your boyfriend, with a close friend, maybe even your father. Give yourself the chance to be open about menstruation and challenge the stigma, and just, have that, that open conversation where you truly talk about your own experience and are able to convey it to somebody else. The second thing, I would look into the environmental impact of the product that you currently use. So there are so many waste calculators online that you can just go. You can even input the brand that you use, and it will tell you the exact amount of waste, or the predictive amount of waste that your product is causing. And this will give you a good idea of what is your contribution to this actual problem. So give yourself the opportunity to Google that, find out what is this waste, and also perhaps try a different option. There are so many sustainable alternatives out there. Have a Google, make a choice, and think about what this would entail. And lastly, I would say support organizations that have a social purpose. There are so many that are trying to help women get a better understanding of their menstruation and access sustainable products. Asam being one of them. I think this is a fantastic way to truly make a contribution, and it's such a personal thing, yet with so many important considerations for society and the economy. So if you want to make a difference, this is a fantastic way to start. And I'm sure, Ira, that you have other really good points to make on how Asam is leading the way and how others can join.
Thank you. I think, a point that you made about next steps that all of us can do, which I think is really important, is just have a conversation to break down that taboo. You mentioned doing it with maybe a man, maybe, your boyfriend or your father or your brother. I think in India, for a lot of us, a conversation that we could be having is with our domestic helpers, our cooks and our cleaners who come to our houses. Take a minute to think about, or ask them, can they afford a safe and sustainable menstruation option? And, how much of their monthly salary does it take up? Can they afford it? And then also, it's not just about the product, it's about everything else we discussed. Do they have a safe way to dispose of it? How do they dispose of it? Do they have access to clean public toilets during the day? And is there a way that you could help them switch to a reusable alternative that will make them more comfortable and also save more money? I think, that the kind of employer and domestic helper relationship is one where we might be too afraid to ask because of taboos. But I think once we break that down, there are a lot of ways in which that could be a first step towards, taking the conversation further and helping to break down the taboo.
And there's a role for everybody to play, and the importance of having a conversation, of building trust, being open about our fears or concerns, but also about the information that we have. It's a great way to contribute and to ensure that everybody who menstruates, women, girls, but also anybody who has a period, feels free and is able to manage it, again, in a dignified way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mariana. I've definitely learned a lot from this conversation. And I think, the main takeaways are very much about breaking down the taboo and promoting access to information and education so that everybody understands the implications of the menstrual products they use and has the information to make the best decision for themselves.
Exactly, an informed choice.
Thank you for hanging in there and listening to the full conversation. If you liked what you heard, do share it with friends and family. You can also leave us a review or rating on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. The crew behind this podcast is Gaurav Krishna on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarvanaraj and Raghu Tenkaila. Episode artwork and design is by Chandni Venkataraman. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcenter.org. This is Lekha Naidu, signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.